Our attention to the growing trend of irregular migration. The harsh economic climate in Nigeria has been blamed for the spate of the exodus of Nigerian citizens in search of better fortunes abroad. Well, a non-governmental organization, the Blacks Ancestral Native Communities Foundation, finds this phenomenon worrisome and is seeking proactive measures to address it. Well, the organization put together an anti-irregular migration summit with the aim of addressing what it describes as the Japa conundrum. Well, let's take a look at this report by Rise News correspondent Charles Eruka.
As citizens of Nigeria and many African countries battle with harsh economic realities at home, many have opted to seek greener pastures in developed countries in Europe, Asia and the Americas, often through illegal and irregular migration. At this symposium by the Blacks Ancestral Native Communities Foundation in Abuja, the focus here is to brainstorm on comprehensive strategies for addressing irregular migration practices. Most of those in attendance are young Nigerians between the ages of 18 and 35 who are likely to opt for migration abroad.
Young Africans have lost their lives in the process of crossing the desert or crossing the sea. In most cases, those who succeeded in arriving at their country of destination are immediately repatriated to their respective countries or forced into modern-day slavery. Our mission is built on the principles of compassion, justice, and solidarity. We recognize the courage and resilience of migrants and commit to amplifying their voices and stories.
The foundation says it's offering several incentives to willing citizens to stop them from illegal migration, which often ends in turmoil for many.
For migration to achieve its intended goals, it must be done through proper and legitimate channels. Prospective migrants must take the time to obtain the required documentation and educate themselves about their destination countries, including the legal systems, economic conditions, and social structures. Unfortunately, many who pursue migration, especially through irregular means, face extreme risks.
To dissect the irregular migration phenomenon, colloquially referred to as the Japa conundrum, the keynote speaker is the renowned Professor Patrick Lumumba. The fiery intellectual places the blame squarely on African leaders.
Why can't we import tea from Kenya? Why can't we import tea from Uganda? Why can't we import cocoa from Ghana? Why can't we import leather from Nigeria? Why can't we import cotton from Malawi? Why can't we import chicken and beef from Botswana? Because if we do so, we'll create jobs in the continent of Africa and nobody will run away to Europe and America.
All said and done, the consensus here is that there is the need for a paradigm shift in Africa where migration becomes a choice and not a desperate necessity. Charles Eruka, Arise News.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss more on this is Professor Patrick Lumumba. He is a Kenyan lawyer and an activist and a Pan-Africanist, if you like, as well as Dr. Chibuzo Onyema, founder and president, Blacks Ancestral Native Communities Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on Primetime tonight.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Indeed. Let me start with you, Professor Lumumba. You are the keynote speaker at the event earlier today, but irregular migration is not a new thing in Africa. However, the mass exodus of skilled talents in recent times has called for concern. Do you think that this is squarely a fault of the leaders in Africa, or are there deeper issues we're not speaking about?
Of course, it's a combination of factors, but evidence available tells us that young Africans prefer to leave their countries in search of what they describe as greener pastures because politicians in many African countries conduct themselves in a manner that creates environments that are toxic to the realization of the desired goals. Mm-hmm. When you see a young graduate leaving Nigeria or Ghana or Sudan, it is because the environment is been poisoned. And why is it poisoned? The policy is implemented to not allow for the creation of opportunities. In certain cases, there are conflicts, and we know quite a number of them. In Sudan now, there are conflicts. In the northern part of the Sahel, there are conflicts. Therefore, it is the politics of the day that creates environments which do not enable circumstances to arise that give young people confidence that they can do well in their countries. And let us be very clear. We are not saying for one moment that migration in and of itself is undesirable. What we are talking about is irregular migration, where young men and women are crossing the Sahara Desert and in an attempt to get to Europe and America get drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. Some of them even go to the Caribbean and try to get into the United States of America or even into Asia. So there are a combination of factors, but I say that the mother of all factors is that in many African countries, the kind of politics that we engage in is not enabling. I call it the absence of political hygiene. And until the day that we get our politics right, so that we have agriculture that is working, so that we have industrialization, so that we have an environment where science and technology is deployed, and people believe that they can fulfill themselves in their countries and earn a living, we are going to continue to have young men and women who are dissatisfied trying to run away from the continent.
Chibuzo, is it really worth the risk? Why do we see so many people make these dangerous journeys? Is the grass really greener on the other side?
Well, the only time they discover that it's not really greener is after they've arrived. And sometimes it's after they've commenced these journeys. These journeys are in themselves very dangerous and precarious. And sometimes you have us losing the youth because they were ill-informed. There is nothing like greener pasture anywhere. I come from a state where youth are thriving on their own, working to make a living by providing the needed industrial revolution, as it were, for Africa. And I'm talking about Abia, my state, my home state. And I'm very proud to say that what I'm putting on here and coming to your studio is made in Aba, for instance. So what has happened to the Nigerian youth is that he thinks that he's suffering because he doesn't have everything that he wishes to have. Not because he lacks anything really. It is because what he thought was needed for livelihood is lacking. Now, they are not totally wrong because all of us are here together and we know all of the sufferings that we have to endure on a daily basis. But the challenge then becomes, are there some persons who are also unemployable, whether it is at home or elsewhere, who would need to upscale their potentials in earning? The answer is yes, because there are several persons who are here in this country who are not employed, not because there aren't employments that they can get, but because they have not done anything or have not done enough to acquiring the needed skills. And what are these skills? They are problem-solving skills. Everybody these days want to go to the university to study courses that will make him or enable him to work for another person. The university systems, until they begin to pay attention to entrepreneurial development of the human persons, building capacity in youth to be able to create employment for themselves, by themselves, towards solving the problems bedeviling our nation, it's still far cry from getting to our destination. And that's the point.
Great. Let me come back to Professor Lumumba. I listened to a speech you gave 2 years ago in Lesotho, and you spoke about compensation as a retention strategy. If you want them to stay, give them what they deserve. But I want to ask you, given the scale of what we're seeing in Africa and in Nigeria particularly. Do you think that this retention strategy might work? Is it a solution?
You know, there is the assumption that people are retained simply because they are in employment and they are properly compensated. That is just one limb of the solution. We've got to remember that we've got to create an environment where people can invent and innovate. When we talk about invention and innovation, we are talking about creation of employment opportunities. But if you want a doctor in Nigeria, for example, to work here in Nigeria, you must compensate them properly. I remember several years ago, I went to Austria, and there was a lady from Zimbabwe, and I said, go back home, go back home. I was waxing eloquent. But she said, when I'm at home, my salary is the equivalent of 50 United States dollars per month. Should I go home? I said, no, don't. Because the reality is that you want to pay school fees.
Yes.
You've got to pay people salaries that can make them survive. But in the same countries, look at the compensation levels for elected politicians, most of whom are not qualified. And you look at the compensation for professionals, is worlds apart. And when young people see this, they say, this is not the place to stay. I'd better be flipping hamburger in the United States of America or working in a geriatric home in Canada than to stay at home. So what is the message? The message is create an environment where those who choose to be employed will be properly compensated. Number two, create an environment where those who choose to invent and innovate can invent and innovate, which means you've got to have energy. You cannot be generating power 5,000 megawatts and you think you are going to industrialize. Create an environment where I can add value in agriculture so that I'm not importing milk, so that I'm not importing sugar, so that I'm not importing things that I can make at home. When you do that, then you retain young people because they can fulfill themselves.
Professor Lumumba, you're very vocal about social and political challenges and African leaders. Let me ask you, do you think that African leaders do not understand the severity of the crisis, or they just don't care?
They don't care. Most of them don't care. They understand. These are some of the people in leadership in Africa are people who know. When you hear them articulate the positions during campaign, when you see their party manifestos, they promise you heaven on earth. But immediately they get into office, I don't know which devil occupies the minds of these individuals. They begin to do exactly the opposite, and exactly the opposite of what is desired. And I want to say that African politicians, the bulk of them, are interested in grand projects which are full of drama without affecting the lives of people in a sustainable way. Mm-hmm. And until the day that the African politician realizes that they hold positions of trust, which gives them the honor and privilege of using public finances to improve the quality of people's lives, what we'll be seeing is that from election to election we see drama. And when we are seeking public office, we see drama. But people's lives don't change. And permit me a comparison. Look at what countries which were at war very recently have achieved in the last 30 years. Look at Vietnam. Look at Malaysia, which was not at war but has achieved much. Look at Singapore. Look at the Scandinavian countries. Look at Indonesia. Look at Dubai, which has now become the mecca for many African politicians and civil servants. What was there? Clarity of vision, clarity of policy, and the desire to fulfill in order to improve the quality of people's lives. But in our part of the world, on average, we are underachieving and underperforming, and the people must also be blamed. The African electorate on average has a very low level of satisfaction. When we are voting because somebody has given us a bag of rice, an insult. We are voting because somebody is from my religion or because somebody is from my tribe. But when you go to other parts of the world, people are being voted into office because that individual or that party has a program that is going to create employment, that is going to improve health, that is going to improve industrialization, that is going to improve agriculture, that is going to ensure that there is security. So the African problem is a combination of politicians and an electorate that are not looking for the benefit of the society.
But given the level of poverty and how it's been weaponized, can we really blame the African people for this?
Oh, we must
To what
blame
extent do we blame them?
We are not the only population in the world to ever have been impoverished.
Indeed.
All these others, when you talk of Asia, when you talk of America, it is during periods of poverty that they rose when you look at the revolution. So
Yeah.
poverty is not an excuse.
Indeed. Let me come back to Oyema in our offsite studio. Dr. Oyema, your foundation intends to set up what you call Irregular Migration Skills Acquisition Resources Center. It's a mouthful. Tell me, how exactly will this work? And can you actually sustain it?
Okay, thank you. It's actually what we launched today. It's actually what we call Irregular Migration Mitigation and Resource Center, IMSAC. And it is going to be a skill acquisition center, but not a skill acquisition center as you have known it before now. It's going to be what we call a non-classroom, common sense intervention system that trains people on required skills. And these are not just the regular kind of training and empowerment, as Prof has rightly put it, our politicians display when they want to facilitate our voting and our election during elections. They are skills that will help these individuals to work either at home or overseas, because our engagement with governments, with nations, and with people, organizations, both here and overseas, is to be ready in supplying legitimate, skilled workers who will be able to fit into desirable roles when they arrive. So that if these people must travel in the first place, they would have the competence that is required in working in those climes. Unlike our place here, there is no other place in the world where people are employed except if they have what those nations are looking for. So get crashing into nations is one thing, but gaining the opportunity to work another. You may get to countries irregularly, but won't still have the opportunity to work because you lack the skills. And so for the nations that are requiring these workmen, and we're partnering with Eco Center for Africa in Canada in doing this, and also other organizations like the Globe Jobs Aid. They will provide these skills for the individuals that have enrolled at the center and train them in the best, global best practice, in the global best standard, so that whether it is in Europe, America, Australasia, Asia, anywhere in the world, that they find themselves, they will be able to serve. That's one. Number two, whether it is here at home, there are some persons, as we know today, who are residing in our country, Nigeria, and are earning very comfortable income on account of skills that they have acquired from here at home. So we are saying, in order for the young people to remain in the country, one thing is to talk and continue to talk, but you can talk forever, nothing will happen. But you must be able to do something in attempting to change the narrative, one of which is provide them an enabling environment, a profitable skill set that will equip them to fit it in competitively with youth of their age anywhere in the world. So sustainability that you asked, this center is going to be funded by several measures and means that I'm not here really to begin to unveil.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Oyema. As we round up in 40 seconds, and I do apologize for the limited time, Professor Lumumba. Some critics argue that the Western countries contribute to this crisis by offering selective migration pathways that favor skilled Africans while offering limited opportunities to those that are unskilled. To what extent do you think that the Western countries are complicit in this challenge?
They are complicit, but I don't blame them. Every nation must define what they want. If the Western countries have defined what they want and they say they want our doctors and they want our nurses and they are getting them out of our continent, it will be the reality, because at the end of the day, these individuals will look at their own personal goals. So it is the duty of African governments to define what we want and to retain the labor that we have trained. Because the reality, the real world is survival of the fittest and the dying of the least suitable. Until the day Africa recognizes that, we'll always be complaining, whining. But the reality is, under the aegis of the African Union or the REX, the ECOWAS, if we enhance intra-African trade, we'll create enough jobs and enough opportunities. And those who deliberately want to migrate, because migration is the mother's milk of human civilization, but it must be regular, it must be orderly. In this country, as in most, we see Chinese, we see Indians, we see Lebanese, but their countries are encouraging them in an orderly manner, and they know they are not dying in any desert, not dying in any sea.
Indeed.
So let us define what we want and work at it, and then we'll achieve what we want.
Indeed. Well said. Professor Patrick Lumumba, Kenyan lawyer, activist, and Pan-Africanist.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on Prime Time. Dr. Chibuzo Onyema, President, Blacks Ancestral Native Communities Foundation. Thank you. We wish you all the best with the foundation and what you have launched today.